some requests to do this again. So I'd like to thank our presenters, Jenny Shear and Leilani Endicott, for being with us here today, and you see them on webcam, and so that's a great addition. Do you two just want to say hi to the group and maybe a brief introduction before we get started?
Happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Leilani Endicott, and I'm the chair of Walden's IRB. I'm the director of the Office of Research Ethics and Compliance, and I'll let Jenny say hello also.
Hello, everyone. I am Jenny Shear. I am the Associate Director in the Office of Research Ethics and Compliance, working with Leilani. And then I'm going to actually hand it back over to Leilani to introduce our third office person who is not on video chat, but we do want to let everyone know about how our office is increasing.
Great. And so do we have Libby on audio? Could you say hello, Libby, and just say your role and your title, please?
Hello, this is Libby. I am the Research Ethics and now I can't think of my full title. Research Ethics Support Specialist.
Thanks, ladies. It's great to have all three of you here with us today. And Libby, as we're going through, if there's something that you want to add or join in the conversation, as all of the participants here are today, please feel free to do so. Before we get started, just a few things. We are using Adobe Connect for today's webinar. The screen that you see, the large screen with the PowerPoint, shows how Adobe Connect is set up. Ours is a little bit different today because we have included some video, and we've set the chat up just a little bit differently, but it's pretty self-explanatory. In the main area that you see highlighted in red there is the presentation, so that's where you'll see the PowerPoint. We have a chat area, and rather up at the top, the chat area is located down at the bottom, and it is a chat. In the questions and answers, only the presenters can see what you're writing, but in the chat here, everyone can see. So go ahead and post your comments, your questions. Go ahead and have that conversation as we're moving through. The other two areas, you can see the attendee list up to the right. On the bottom, we do have closed captioning. Angie is here providing that service today, so if you need that, go ahead and access that there. And right in the middle, we see our video, which is a nice addition to our presentation. We'd like you all to participate as much as you can. Like I said, you can type into the chat if you have questions or comments, and our presenters and myself will all be monitoring that and make sure that your questions get addressed. If you'd like to have your webcam activate, or excuse me, not your webcam, but your microphone activated, you can raise your hand. You see that's highlighted there. It's kind of hard to see. It's in the gray menu at the top. It's a little guy with his hand raised. If you just hit the drop-down box, the very first item is on there, raised hand. We can see your hand is raised. We can unmute you, and you can share your question or your comment verbally, and that would be great. A couple other things. We are recording today's session, so there will be a link available to that recording for you or any of your colleagues who weren't able to be here today. I'll send that out after the presentation, as well as a link to the PowerPoint. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Leilani, you going to start?
Yes, happy to. Well,
okay,
welcome.
Great.
We're so glad you all have been able to join us, and today we're interested in sharing really an overview of some information that we think will be helpful to anyone who supervises student research, particularly doctoral research, and we'd also like to touch on issues that may be helpful for your own research. And so here are the three learning outcomes that we're trying to accomplish today. First of all, we want to try to give you some insight as to which student research topics could really benefit from early IRB consultation. So we'll be giving you some examples. And if you have questions in the chat area, feel free, as Lori mentioned, to enter those there, and we'll try to hit them all in the session, and maybe some of them we'll have to take offline or follow up with you later. But I think this is an ideal opportunity for us to hear what your questions are, and maybe we can have we plan to leave some time at the end for some open-ended discussion of things that you would like to hear more about. We also are going to be sharing just a few of the key university policies that really have an impact on what kinds of studies can be accomplished at Walden. And given that, we don't have certain types of facilities, we don't have any medical facilities, we do have lots of potential with community partner sites. So we'll be sharing with you what some of the parameters are on the types of research that Walden researchers, both students and faculty, can accomplish. And then finally, we also want to make sure that you're aware of what resources the university has available to try to help increase the dialogue and awareness for student researchers, well, faculty researchers, early on in the process. And we figure if we can help help all the faculty be aware of these resources, then you in turn can help your students be aware of those resources that are available to them. Oh, I see a request to speak louder, so I'm going to go ahead and put my phone a little closer to me. Happy to. Okay, so first I'd like to make you aware of who the IRB members are. And you met Jenny. You see Jenny on the camera. Libby is also with us today. Libby's our front line, by the way. So when you send an email to irb@waldenu.edu, Libby is going to, she's excellent at getting back to people very quickly, and she will make sure your question gets to the right person who can give you or your student the most efficient and comprehensive answer. And so Libby joined us earlier this year. Jenny's been with Walden for 8 years. She previously, before she came to the IRB office, she was an academic advisor, so she has a lot of experience in terms of guiding students and understanding the dissertation process from beginning to end. And I've been with the university also for about 11 years, about 9 years in this role. And so, and you can see here, hopefully, as you're seeing this list of faculty members, I hope you see someone whom you recognize from your college, because they are a resource to you. I won't read all of their names. You can see there that we have a nice diversity across the colleges. We're often in the process of sort of rebalancing and making sure that every college has got good representation and that various programs have good representation. But please view these individuals that you see on the screen as resources within your college to perhaps to lead initiatives that you may have, or to lead questions that you as a field or as a discipline might might bump into, because honestly, some of our best problem solving has been accomplished as these individuals that you see, as they have brought to Jenny and me and to Libby also, that they've been able to bring to us the issues that have been particular concerns for each college. And so we view them as sort of liaisons between our various programs and the Institutional Review Board. And at this time, I also want to let you know, because I realize some of you might be sort of new to Walden, the Institutional Review Board is it's housed within the Center for Research Quality. And so the Center for Research Quality is the same body that maintains the dissertation guide and the MyDR process, and the really is responsible for maintaining the standards for research quality and dissertation, well, not just dissertation, but the dissertation, the doctoral capstones, and the project capstones for all the doctoral programs. That's all overseen by the Center for Research Quality. So we're part of a much larger group. And sometimes when you go to residencies, sometimes the other directors within the Center for Research Quality are also available at residencies. So if you have, for example, IRB questions or questions about the dissertation process, they are really excellent resources for you. Okay, so Lori is going to lead this poll, I believe.
I am. Sorry about that. I wasn't quite on that. So yeah, we're going to find out just a little bit about what you know about studies that have been approved at Walden, what kinds of studies that Walden students are allowed to do. So we have a little poll and see what you think. I'll open this up here, and you should be able just to click on the right on the screen and show your response. I'll go ahead and broadcast the results. So, we have a study about the experiences of victims of violence, evaluating the impact of an alternative therapy program, assessing teenage use of drugs or alcohol, or determining the impact of a new business policy on employees. So you can check all that you think are studies that Walden would support students in doing, or that they would approve. And I'll just give you just a few more seconds to go ahead and type on the screen and let us know what you think. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll then. And we had a few people choose all of them. Leilani?
Thanks, Lori. Yes, so we put this up here. You know, we kind of, this isn't quite Mythbusters like you see, but I think that there is a myth out there that it's really difficult to have sensitive studies approved by the Walden IRB or by IRBs in general. And in fact, all of these are studies that have been conducted at Walden. We've had students to actually go into war zones and interview victims of violence, victims who had experienced a loss of a family member and were, you know, experiencing mental health issues. And we've alternate therapy with counseling patients, teen use of drugs and alcohol, impact of a new business policy and employees. These are all things that, though sensitive, were able to be studied. In many cases, these were challenging ethics reviews, but the reviews went much more smoothly when the student reached out to us early on in the process. And when I say early, I mean at some point between prospectus approval and well before proposal defense. And so, you know, really when they're writing Chapter 1, Chapter 3, you know, sort of once they've done the lit review, that's a good time to reach out to the IRB, especially if they're thinking about what type of population would they think about collecting data from and what type of data might they be thinking about collecting. Those are times when the student is thinking of either a sensitive topic or a vulnerable population. Those are times when a student could really benefit from setting up a consultation with IRB, from attending IRB office hours. We do offer office hours 3 times a week, and we'll be a little bit later on in the session, we're going to show you where some of this information is posted on the website. But it changes from quarter to quarter, but we do have 3 hourly time slots per week in which we post a link, and anybody who wants, faculty or students, can come join in on a conversation where any questions are welcome, big or small. Like even really the tiniest question is a welcome question. And the folks that we have staffing these office hours really just enjoy talking to students and faculty about the IRB process and the ethics review process and about research in general. They're very knowledgeable researchers. And so on this next slide here, I just wanted to highlight some of the different types of sensitive data collection that can be done, and yet there might be certain ethical parameters. There might be some limitations or some rules of thumb that the student would do well to know about early on. And so I'm just going to go through these, and that way, hopefully, if any of you have a student who's thinking about doing a study touching on any of these components, then I would simply recommend that you encourage them to get in touch with IRB. I would honestly recommend that you have them start with office hours, and then from there the office hours facilitator can sort of identify what the big issues are and help them articulate what questions they might have. And then they could maybe send a formal email into IRB to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about, can you let me know, is this going to be doable or not? So let's go through these bullets. The first one is if a researcher is thinking about asking any questions about substance abuse, mental state, violence, either the participant as a perpetrator or the participant as a victim, anything that might obligate a referral. So there are many situations, as you may be aware, in which if a researcher learns about someone possibly being in harm's way, that they may be obligated to make a referral to the authorities or to the emergency room or to psychological support, or possibly to, in some extreme cases, to provide an intervention to actually protect the participant in an immediate situation. And I think this is the most common sense one, I think, that we put this one first. It's pretty obvious that if you have a student who's interested in studying addiction, severe depression, suicidality, eating disorders, bullying, physical threats, we have probably a handful of these studies, about a handful of these studies per month. And they're doable, but it's really helpful if the student is in touch with us early on about what some of the challenges are. Just as an example, students who are studying these types of situations that might obligate a referral, they have a choice about whether to collect identifiable data or anonymous data. So for example, if they're doing interviews, they're with the person, they're going to have to follow up on any very sensitive issues that might obligate a referral to the authorities or obligate a referral to psychological help. And it complicates the issue when you tell people up front in the consent process that, well, I'm going to be asking you about abuse that you might have perpetrated or abuse that you might have experienced, and I'm going to be obligated to make that report to the authorities. I mean, that's a complicated situation, and it's much better if a student comes and talks to us early on so we can walk them through what would those scenarios look like. How would that then impact your data? And that's with an interview situation. If we take, on the other hand, an anonymous survey type of data collection, that is a little different, because oftentimes when you collect, when you collect data anonymously, you don't have the capacity to follow up, and you often sort of leave it on the individual. If you're feeling distressed by being part of the study, then you should follow up with this resource or that resource. And it's a very different dynamic than talking to them one-on-one and having either the eye contact or the face-to-face or the phone contact and doing the referral. So we really like to have the opportunity, when possible, to walk students through both of those scenarios so they can use those insights to help shape their inquiry process, so it can help inform their decision of whether they want to go with a qualitative sort of interview approach or more of a quantitative or even a qualitative anonymous survey approach. With that said, the research questions should always lead the inquiry, but we feel like those times when those students learn about the dynamics very late in the game, when they've already made a decision, they've committed to qualitative or quantitative, I often feel bad. I often feel like they didn't have all the information at their fingertips to make a well-informed decision. So that's why we're enlisting your help as faculty members to try to encourage them to get in touch with us so we can go through these different dynamics and potential situations with them in advance. So let's look at the second bullet. Another item that could benefit from early consultation is questions to participants about professional work that could lead to disclosure of behaviors or views that could maybe get someone fired or pass over for promotion. There are quite a few students who are studying either professional practices or adherence to professional standards, and these are really important things to study. But obviously, participants take a bit of a risk when they share this information about themselves. And if our researchers want honest, authentic responses, then they have to provide protections to the participants. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to interact with the researchers in their planning phases to help them think through, okay, if you want authentic, honest responses, what are you going to have to do in order to provide adequate protections to your participants and help them feel comfortable enough to provide those honest responses. And this can be an issue, honestly, in any field, whether it's in a corporate setting, in a professional, in a K-12 setting or a military setting. It is really important, of course, in any professional type of professional context in which a student might be recruiting research participants, to make sure that their participation in the study is not going to turn around and somehow backfire and hurt them professionally. Regarding the third bullet, I think this is an obvious one that many faculty and students are aware of, but just to highlight the importance, I wanted to mention that any type of research that's inquiring about illegal activities, certainly the student, it can be done. We do permit students to ask participants about their illegal activities, but what we are going to require is that the researcher is upfront from the very beginning about what possible situations might lead them as a researcher to need to disclose the information to the authorities. And usually what we do is we counsel the student researchers on all the various scenarios that could come up, and most of the time we encourage them to maintain complete confidentiality. But if there might be a few situations, like one example might be, we've had students who say, well, if a terrorist situation came up, obviously I wouldn't keep that to myself. Forget about researcher confidentiality. I wouldn't want innocent people to be at risk. And then we say, well, okay, if that's the situation and if it could feasibly come up during your data collection, you need to disclose, yes, there are certain situations in which I might break confidentiality. And we don't expect researchers to figure this all out on their own. So that's why, again, we're just advising that they come talk to us early on in the process so we can help them think about these possibilities. Moving on to the fourth bullet, any personal issues if a study is looking at, for example, ethnicity, body image, religion, and I'm certainly not saying that these issues are inherently distressing, but sometimes the process of recruitment or even the process of data collection sometimes can create situations in which a person is feeling marginalized because of the views they hold or because of their situation, and so we like to try to help researchers be as well prepared as possible for dealing with those situations. The fifth bullet is one that I think is often surprising to students and faculty, and race or ethnicity as a variable in the study or as an inclusion criterion. I just want to emphasize it's doable. For example, if somebody, if a student only wants to recruit Latin American college students experiencing, they might have a very specific population that they're interested in studying, and we would talk to them about how they're going to go about recruitment and how they're going to go about confirming that their population meets their definition of Latin American. We would walk through them through to sort of unpack the various dimensions of using race or ethnicity in research to try to help them avoid a situation that's really difficult. And I'll be honest, it's most difficult in a K-12 setting to have race or ethnicity as an inclusion variable. It's less problematic if you're dealing with adults who are responding to a flyer or something like that. The best case scenario is that if a researcher is using race as an inclusion variable, really the best approach is to use a flyer type of situation, a flyer type of reach out in which the participants themselves can self-identify as that race or ethnicity, rather than having some situation where an employer or a school is deciding that so-and-so is a certain race, therefore they're eligible for the study. But again, I think that it's best if the researcher comes to office hours or comes and sets up a consultation with IRB so we can walk them through that. And then finally, any type of study that is looking at the outcomes of a new intervention or program, we would really want to be able to talk to them in advance about really the sponsorship of the program versus the research or the program evaluation. And many of our students do program evaluation for their research capstones, for dissertations for doctoral studies, and some of our strongest doctoral research projects have been program evaluations, but we need to make absolutely sure, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, that the intervention is delivered and sponsored and conducted separately from the program evaluation. And by the way, there is a newly posted document on the IRB website, and it is called Jenny might need to help me out here. What do we name it? Studies that could benefit from, or studies that need early IRB consultation. Is that close?
Okay, now my computer is going very slow. Yes, it's red flag issues that need an early IRB consultation.
Thank you. Red flag issues that may need early IRB consultation. So if you want to take a look at these lists, at this list again, that's where it's posted on our website if you'd like to refer students to it. And that document also has a list of vulnerable populations. And so I just wanted to verbally go through those really quickly. I think most researchers, most faculty are aware of who the vulnerable populations are. The big one is kids. Another vulnerable population is prisoners. Hospital patients are considered to be a vulnerable population. But there are some other vulnerable populations that maybe aren't so quick to pop into our minds. If any of you are managers, your subordinates are a vulnerable population if you are the researcher. If any of you are educators, your students are vulnerable populations if you, the instructor, is the researcher. Same thing if any of you are clinicians, then your patients would be considered a vulnerable population. And so a vulnerable population is essentially anyone who might be in a situation in which they're not fully able to advocate for their own rights. They, anytime there's a power differential, that those folks on the lower end of the power structure would be considered a vulnerable population. And so, again, I don't want to discourage anyone from doing research with vulnerable populations or these sensitive topics listed here. I just wanted to highlight that they could really benefit by coming and talking to IRB sometime between the prospectus and writing Chapter 3, the method section. Okay, and I'm going to switch over to Jenny in a second. She'll be sharing some other information, but I just wanted to highlight here what are some of the dimensions. I mean, I'm not going to try to cover today all the different things that the IRB considers, but again, we're just trying to draw to your attention what are the things that could really, what are the insights that could help you as a faculty member better support your students who are conducting research. And so here are three of the points we really wanted to share. One is that research might be ethically challenging even if it doesn't involve an obviously vulnerable population or a sensitive topic. And I hinted at that just a second ago. So a lot of times, we might think of adult college students as being, adults who are perfectly capable of deciding whether they want to be in a research study or not. And that's true. But if our graduate student happens to be their professor, then we have a power relationship. We have a dual role because we have here a graduate student who also happens to be a professor. And so anytime you've got that dual role, then we have to make really sure that everything about the consent form and the research invitation, the recruitment process, the data collection process separates their graduate student role from their professor role. Same thing if your graduate student happens to be a nurse practitioner, or if your graduate student happens to be a therapist or a teacher. We want to make sure that when they put on the researcher hat, that they, to some degree, take off their professional role hat in order that they not leverage their authority role in order to inappropriately pressure their subordinates into being in their study. And you know what? This happens on accident many times. Or I shouldn't say on accident. I think many times our graduate students, they've got, frankly, such tunnel vision by the time they get to the dissertation or the doctoral study phase, they don't see the risks in inviting their subordinates to be part of their own doctoral study. But if we think about it, if any of us were conducting a study, especially a study that was important to our own career, like getting a doctorate, would our subordinates really feel like they could say no to us, even if we are inviting them and saying, oh, it's volunteer, it's optional, you don't have to do it? They're going to feel an awful lot of pressure to volunteer for the study. And so we can work with the students. And again, with the dual roles, I'm not saying it cannot be done. In fact, just to give you a little bit of a preview, the best way to manage dual roles is for the data to be collected completely anonymously. And by that I mean even the consent process, you take out the consent signature, you set it up with implied consent so that they are either, usually it's an online survey or written survey, and they're completing that survey without telling the researcher who they are, and that provides protection to the participant so that even a college professor, if they wanted to invite their own students to be in a study, it would be acceptable if it was completely anonymous and that professor is not able to tell who responded and who didn't, and is not able to tell who said what, who gave which responses. So we can work with the students, but it is best, it's helpful for all if we're able to share these potential solutions with them pretty early on in the process. And in the second box here is just a general piece of advice that if you have a student who is really committed to conducting data on a sensitive topic like bullying or a vulnerable population like prisoners or children, please do encourage them, but also please encourage them that they're going to need to be flexible and that, as they come talk to us, as they go talk to their partner site, they're going to need to be really open-minded, and they cannot walk in with this idea like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to be doing the such and such measure, or I'm going to be, doing this particular type of interview. The more flexible they can be, honestly, the more likely we are to be able to find a solution for them that's going to let them conduct a study that can address the research questions they're interested in answering. And then finally, really this is the most general statement that we can make about what does it take to obtain IRB approval. IRB approval, really what it comes down to is that the benefits of the study need to outweigh the risks. And so what happens is that the IRB has two tracks for review. We have expedited review and we have full board review. And unlike some other places where you might have worked, we don't put it on the researchers to, sort of decide, what expedited review category they fit into. We support them. We help them figure that out. And something like 90% of Walden studies, actually it's probably more than that now, but at least 95% of Walden studies are expedited. And so we automatically put them in that category if it qualifies. And then it's only the studies that involve the most sensitive populations, such as children, prisoners, people in residential facilities, hospital, inpatient hospital patients. Those studies do come to the full board for review. And then we have the board vote on the protocol, and we have a discussion, we have some dialogue with the researcher, and then we try to really convey to the student what would it take in order to shift the risk-benefit ratio so that the benefits outweigh the risks. So I just want to emphasize that since those studies are doable as long as the benefits outweigh the risks. Okay, and so if you recall, one of our second learning objectives is that we wanted to help make you aware of some university policies that might place some limitations on the studies that can be done at Walden. The first is a really big one, especially for those of you who are in the fields of education, psychology, nursing, and public health. And that is that any type of program evaluation, with any type of program evaluation, the program itself needs to be overseen by a community partner. So that means the student cannot simultaneously wear the hats of, oh, I'm going to roll out this intervention, I'm going to offer this intervention, and I'm going to be the evaluator. There are, in all cases, I would say, the best question you could ask a student who's thinking about doing program evaluation, just to help them explore the feasibility of the study, is who is who is offering this intervention? And hopefully the student will respond, so-and-so site or so-and-so organization. And if they have trouble answering that question, if they say, well, I don't know, I was planning to offer the intervention myself, then they should really come talk to us early on, because sometimes those students are able to make it work because they're able to find a partner site, and in some cases we can help them figure out an approach for secondary analysis that will work. So I just want to mention that sometimes when a student is a provider of an intervention, sometimes it is possible for the student to work with their employer or whatever entity is offering the intervention to release de-identified data for research purposes so that the researcher can do a secondary analysis of data that was originally collected as part of the intervention itself or as part of the standard operations of that organization. And, you know, Jenny and Libby and I have a set of questions. We go through the student researcher, we go through with them and we help them identify yes or no. Does this describe your study? And sometimes we call these the litmus test questions for secondary analysis. They are listed on our website under there's an FAQ for doing research in the, research in the researcher's own professional context. So if the student were to go into that FAQ, they can find these 6 questions and explore. But it would be just as easy for you to refer them to IRB at waldenu.edu or to the office hours so they could explore whether or not they've got enough separation between the intervention role and the research role. So the second policy that you should be aware of is one that I've mentioned here, and that is that student researchers are not able to collect identifiable data, such as interviews, from individuals who are subordinate to them in any type of relationship that involves supervision or trust. So the power relationship, such as educators and students, managers or direct reports, care providers and patients. It does not mean that research cannot be done. It just means that if they are going to collect data from their own students or their own direct reports or their own patients, then it needs to be de-identified data. It needs to be data that's either completely anonymous from the beginning, or it needs to be a secondary analysis of data that was created as a part of the organization's standard operations. So it could be data that they are pulling from HR records. If, for example, they're studying their direct reports, or it could be data if your student's a care provider, it could be data they're pulling from chart reviews from their patients. It could be data that an educator is pulling from their own students' records. So we recommend a secondary analysis approach or anonymous data collection approach for any student researchers who are in a power relationship with the individuals that they want to study in their capstone. And then the final point here is that student researchers are not permitted to use research assistants in any way that interacts with participants in either recruitment or data collection. And the one exception to that is interpreters. Interpreters are permitted, and they must be, it's a very strict definition of what interpreters are. So in some cases we have permitted researchers to hire an interpreter to actually do translation. So they have to, literally there has to be the researcher here, interpreter here, and the participant here, and the interpreter's in the middle translating what the researcher says, translating what the participant says, translating what the researcher says, translating what the participant says. We do not permit researchers to hire someone who speaks the language to go collect the data. That doesn't fly. That won't work. That doesn't meet the university's standards of what we can oversee as a university. And so if you ever have students who are feeling a little iffy on this question, please send them to us and we can listen to what they're proposing and tease apart, what the situation is. And in some cases we can help them come up with a solution that doesn't involve a research assistant. But they need to be aware that they are not going to be allowed to have any staff at the site do the recruitment on their behalf or to do the data collection on their behalf. I do want to mention, though, that it's possible for a researcher to have someone at a site distribute flyers or maybe even distribute packets if they're collecting data by survey, it's possible to have the site staff distribute materials on their behalf, but no materials can be returned from the participants to the site staff. They need to be returned directly to the researcher. And you know, part of it is that we expect the researchers to collect their own data, but another part of it is that as a university, we are not able to oversee people who are not our own employees and our own students, and we certainly can't require training of them. So when I mentioned that interpreters are sometimes permitted, we require that those interpreters have training in research ethics and informed consent. They need to have some formal training, which we permit our researchers to facilitate, but it needs to be formalized in a formal letter of agreement between the interpreter and the researcher. And we have a template for that we can help the student tailor for their study. Okay, and I just also wanted to briefly mention that faculty research is also expected to obtain IRB approval if it's going to have any kind of Walden affiliation or be or any touching on Walden funds or presented at a Walden event. And so if you're in a position, for example, in which you had previous IRB approval at another site, but then you want to present some of the findings at one of the Walden Symposium sessions or at even at a conference, but you're going to have Walden pay for part of your conference travels, then we can work with you on just sort of establishing what we would just ask for essentially is a copy of your site's IRB approval to ensure that there was some sort of ethical oversight, even if it was conducted, you know, with another country. It doesn't have to be an IRB per se, because those are only in the U.S. It could be an ethics committee like they use in other countries. But we do need to make sure that any research that is published with the Walden affiliation, that you check in with our office, and we can help you with almost any situation. There has yet, you know, to be a situation that arises that we haven't been able to help with. And I also want to mention that if the study is being done as part of a faculty member's job, so if you are an assessment coordinator in your program, or if you are, you know, taking on some lead faculty role and you're doing a mini study as part of your role in assessing instructional processes or learning processes, you can do those studies without IRB approval if your plan is to share the results just within Walden or within Laureate. But if you do want to share those results outside of Laureate or outside of Walden, you need IRB approval, and you can do that after the fact. You can get the IRB approval after the fact. So just write us an email and we'll work with you on that. Just let us know what the situation is. You can just say, okay, so I conducted this study as part of my professional role, and now I'm interested in presenting it at a conference, you know, under the Walden affiliation, or using some of the Walden funding sources to help pay for my conference. And we will work with you on how to make sure you get the IRB approval. It's generally very easy. It's usually considered a secondary analysis of Walden's data. And so generally there's no problem with that. But I do want to mention here that you shouldn't collect any data from students or from faculty without looping in Walden's institutional approver. And it's a bit unfortunate that that sounds an awful lot like Institutional Review Board, but the institutional approver is someone who's in the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment. It's a designee of the Chief Academic Officer, and that person at the moment is Sherry Jorison. So I just want to mention that if you are planning to collect any kind of data from students or faculty or alums, you do need to loop in Sherry Jorison, because she's responsible for formally approving that type of data collection, even if you are not planning on sharing it at a conference. And I'm just going to type that here. Institutional approver is Sherry Jorison. All right. And we have another poll here, which I think Lori's going to help with.
righty, so the next poll is, we're just curious how often you direct students to the IRB resources. We just want our presentation to, oops, I'll open that. We just want our presentation to be able to focus on your needs. So just real quickly here, if you, this is anonymous, so don't feel like, oh, you know, I'm not using the IRB, I should. Oh, come on, there we go. So go ahead and just click on the screen. Do you not use them very often? Do you use them sometimes if there's a student who has a particular need, or were you not aware there were resources online? So just go ahead and quickly click on the screen and let us know how often you use those resources. Again, this is completely anonymous, so no worries about whether or not you use them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll then. Leilani, it looks like we have someone in the audience who uses it very often, but the majority of the group uses them sometimes if there's a sensitive topic.
Thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Jenny at this point.
Okay. Well, and we do want to highlight some of the resources that we have, and I'm going to very quickly just shift over to share my website, my screen with you, so that you can see some of the things that are on our website, because we really do, for nothing else that you take away from this presentation, is to really understand the importance of having students contact us early, because it really can make a very big difference in helping students in understanding what questions to ask. You know, we're very much aware that students don't know what they don't know, and we really want to help guide them towards some of these resources so that they can begin to understand what some of the questions are that they should be thinking of. And so hopefully you can see my screen at this point, and this is the IRB section of the website. We are housed, as Leilani said earlier, under the Center for Research Quality, and so we are under the Research Ethics tab here. And we do offer, I just kind of wanted to highlight the some of the resources that we have. And one of the main things, especially going back to you know, the students that are working with possibly a vulnerable population or maybe a more sensitive topic, we do offer several guides that can be referenced. And it is something where it's definitely worth having students review these really at any time, you know, to help understand issues that they can consider, because they can really be used to help guide a student as far as what, you know, not only what questions can they ask, but how can the study be practically accomplished. And we certainly want students to understand that we are willing to meet them, but that, you know, we found that they're much more willing to be flexible early on in their proposal development than when they hit IRB, and are very excited to move on to data collection. And we really understand that and want to work with them so that they can maintain that excitement and that enthusiasm. And so certainly, you know, these documents here can really be useful tools. But I also wanted to switch over to where our application is found. And Leilani has mentioned this, but this is something that's a little bit, it's new within probably about the last 6 to 9 months, that we do offer advising sessions 3 times a week. And as Leilani mentioned, the times and days do change on a quarterly basis based on when we can staff them. But the advising sessions really can be great opportunities for students to speak with experienced IRB members, to serve as brainstorming opportunities. Oftentimes, and this is something where even if they submit questions to the IRB email account, we still encourage them to contact the office hours and the advising sessions, even if we're able to specifically answer their question, but at the same time, because they can be so valuable in just being able to bounce ideas off of somebody else, or possibly even just to attend to get ideas based on what other people are doing. We've had several people come and really just kind of sit quietly and listen to the conversation, and there can be so much that can be learned from those sessions. And so certainly, if you have a student, whether they have a question or no questions, the advising hours really can be great opportunities for students to learn from other IRB members, other students, possibly getting ideas from what other students are doing as well. And again, it goes back to helping them understand these are the questions that we should be thinking about. These are the questions that will possibly be asked of me later on, and what can I do to help start addressing those now and work those into my proposal. And we found that having students think about these questions really throughout their proposal development really does help make for a much more smoother IRB process, because they have work it into all aspects of their study rather than just thinking about it and trying to add it on afterwards, which, depending on the sensitivity of the data or the vulnerability of the population, it can be very difficult to piecemeal ethical protections in after the fact. And it's much more difficult to have that flexibility that's needed to help ensure that the ethical protections of the participants are maintained. And then I did just want to highlight one last form that's here on our main, with our forms and other application materials, and it's this Research Ethics Planning Worksheet. And I'm not going to open it up, but for students where they really, maybe have a lot of concern about the IRB review or just aren't really sure what they should be thinking about, the Research Ethics Planning Worksheet can really be a great opportunity for students to get oriented with what the expectations of the IRB review will be. This document actually mirrors the criteria that we use when we're reviewing IRB applications, and it matches field by field the exact form that we use when considering what ethical criteria are needed and what information is needed to help ensure that those risks are minimized and the benefits maximized. And so really, again, once a student is starting to get to where they're having a little bit more of a formalized plan, referencing this planning worksheet can really be helpful for students because it lets them start thinking about some of the questions that the IRB will be asking them so that they can plan ahead and think about those. And the form itself actually has hyperlinks as part of it to help explain further where the IRB is coming from with regards to some of those criteria. It's really more, the worksheet is really more to just help them to understand and to think about the questions that will be asked, not necessarily providing any answers necessarily. And so certainly really having students, go through this form. If there are sections where they're getting stuck, if they don't know if what they're planning to do would satisfy the criteria, that's an excellent opportunity then for them to follow that up with either contacting the IRB directly via the email account or attending those advising hours to try to get clarification. So there are really some great resources that students can use in tandem throughout their proposal process. Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to go back. Lauren, can you help me get back to the presentation so I can bring up the last slide?
Yep. I'm getting there. A lot of things in my list here. Let me just find it. Oh, here we go. Should be coming up. And which slide did you want?
Yep, right where we're at is perfect. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So we did just want to kind of, again, some key takeaways, some really important points, and really if you hear nothing else, focusing on these things and really sharing these points with the students. First, if it's the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. Really, again, it goes back to students just don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they need to know in order to be prepared. And so really helping them understand that there are resources out there to help them, that there are, the IRB is accessible throughout the proposal process. It's not, if the first time that they're thinking about ethical issues is at their IRB review, then that's, for some students that's too late, and it's very, very difficult to help backtrack and get their study, and to meet them and to find those compromises. And that's ultimately really what we want to do, is help to identify, if they are wanting to do a study that involves some more than minimal risk or involves those vulnerable populations, to find where those compromises are so that we can help them, do the study that they are so impassioned about. The second one, risk, we talk about it a lot. It's something that's mentioned almost synonymously with the IRB. And that's to be fair. Most research involves some amount of risk, and we are aware of that, and we're not asking students to have a completely risk-free study. And again, going back to some of those studies that we mentioned in the initial poll, were that, we had asked, they were doing some very, very sensitive studies, but, the students were able to minimize the risk. They were able to consider what the ethical issues are and really work hard to make sure that those participants would be protected. Again, being flexible, and this is something where, again, the earlier students start thinking about the ethical issues associated with their study, the easier it will be for them to be flexible and to consider compromises and to consider different ways that their studies can be conducted. Again, our goal is not to not allow students to move forward. We are excited for them to move forward with their data collection as they are. But again, helping them to understand that sometimes you just might need to take a different route than initially planned might make all the difference. And then again, just as another plug for all of our resources, really just helping them understand that they don't have to do it alone. This is what we do day in and day out, and we are more than willing to share this information with students to really help them understand those issues so that they can be more prepared as they work through their proposal, and really have more confidence with what they're doing and knowing that what they're proposing really is a strong study that has the participants thinking about their protections and what they need to do to make sure that those risks are minimized and that their study really can be as great as it possibly can be. And so just to kind of finalize with that is just, again, these are these available resources that we went over with the website, and really just encouraging students anytime they have questions, large or small, we really do welcome those because, again, it's so important to begin thinking of these things early on so that students can prepare for them and start identifying those solutions.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I'm sorry, go ahead, Leilani.
Oh, excuse me. I don't know if there were any questions here. If you like, you can type them in the chat area, or you're very welcome to contact us later on if you think of something. There's our IRB address up at the top. It's irb@waldenu.edu. And we really are happy to have had this time with you and look forward to seeing more of you and hearing more from you in the future.
Thanks, Leilani. And as I said, I will be sending out a link to the recording of the session, the PowerPoint, and the email for the IRB so that you have that. Thanks, Bill. It was great having you here, too. And thanks to our presenters, Jenny and Leilani, for sharing their expertise with the IRB. I've heard this webinar a couple times now, and both times I've learned a lot. So we'd like to thank them for their expertise. And Libby, thank you for being with us, too. We welcome you to the team. With that, I'd like to wish everyone a great rest of your day. And if you do have questions for the IRB, please feel free to reach out to them and ask your questions. Thank you.